There is something unusual about the message you're about to hear, because this isn't a story that begins with a goodbye or a misunderstanding. It begins with a silence that finally broke. Somewhere very recently, someone who had been carrying a secret for far too long reached a point where keeping it hidden became more painful than speaking the truth. They weren't trying to change the past. They weren't looking for attention. They simply could no longer live with the weight of knowing that one untold truth had quietly shaped the lives of two people who never deserved the confusion it created. And listen carefully, because your soulmate was never expecting this conversation to happen. They believed they had already accepted what happened between the two of you. They believed they had all the answers they would ever receive. Yet a single confession has completely shaken everything they thought they understood. The version of events they carried in their heart for so long has suddenly begun to fall apart, piece by piece, leaving behind questions they never imagined they would have to ask. Your soulmate cannot stop thinking about one thing. If this truth had been spoken sooner, how different would everything have been? That question has settled deep inside them because they are beginning to realize that some of the distance, some of the pain, and some of the silence between you may never have belonged to either of you. Sometimes the greatest misunderstandings are not created by cruel intentions, but by missing pieces that no one was willing to reveal. And your heart needs this right now, because hidden truths have a remarkable way of waiting until the exact moment they can no longer remain hidden. No matter how much time passes, what is real always searches for a way to be seen. Your soulmate is witnessing that reality unfold before their eyes. And listen to this, because the confession they heard was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no desperate attempts to rewrite history, and no perfect explanation that suddenly erased every painful memory. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost unexpectedly, through words spoken with hesitation and regret. The person finally admitted that not everything happened the way your soulmate had been led to believe. There were details left out, conversations that were never shared, intentions that had been misunderstood from the very beginning. As those words settled into their heart, something shifted that cannot be undone. Old memories started returning with entirely new meaning. Moments they once dismissed suddenly felt important. Conversations they thought they understood now seemed incomplete. Even your silence, which they once interpreted one way, now carried an entirely different message, because your heart needs this right now. There comes a moment when the truth stops asking for permission and simply reveals itself. Your soulmate has reached that moment. They are replaying every memory, every choice, and every unanswered question, with eyes that finally see beyond appearances. What once looked like distance now feels like sacrifice. What once looked like indifference now feels like protection. The more they reflect, the more they realize that someone else's silence may have stolen the chance for both of you to truly understand each other. And as this realization grows stronger with every passing moment, one forgotten conversation keeps returning to their mind. At the time it seemed ordinary, almost insignificant. But now they cannot escape the feeling that it contained the very truth that could have changed everything long before tears ever became part of this story. For a long time, your soulmate believed they understood exactly what had happened between the two of you. They had built an entire story inside their heart, a story that seemed complete because it answered the questions they were too afraid to ask. Whenever confusion appeared, they returned to that version of events because it felt familiar, even if it never brought them peace. They accepted certain explanations without realizing they were only hearing fragments instead of the whole truth. They trusted words spoken by people they believed had no reason to hide anything. They assumed that silence meant acceptance, that distance meant indifference, and that unanswered questions would eventually fade with time. Yet despite convincing themselves that everything had already been settled, there was always a quiet feeling inside that refused to disappear. It was small enough to ignore during busy days, but impossible to silence during quiet nights. Something never completely made sense, even though they couldn't explain why. And listen to this, because the heart often recognizes what the mind cannot yet understand. Long before evidence appears, the heart notices the missing pieces, the unanswered questions, and the strange feeling that something important has been left unsaid. Your soulmate carried that feeling for much longer than they admitted, but they kept pushing it aside because accepting uncertainty felt easier than questioning everything they believed. Then, without warning, someone finally spoke. It wasn't a carefully planned confession or a dramatic attempt to change the past. It was simply a moment when carrying the weight of the truth became impossible. They admitted that there were conversations your soulmate never heard, circumstances they never understood, and choices that looked completely different from the inside than they appeared from the outside. Those words landed softly, yet their impact was overwhelming. Suddenly, the certainty your soulmate had depended on began to crumble. Every answer they once trusted started raising new questions instead. Every explanation they accepted now seemed incomplete. And your heart needs this right now because the truth rarely changes overnight. It unfolds one realization at a time, gently removing the layers of misunderstanding until only honesty remains. That is exactly what your soulmate is experiencing. They have begun revisiting memories they believed were long behind them. A conversation that once sounded ordinary now feels filled with hidden meaning. A moment when you chose silence instead of defending yourself suddenly seems less like distance and more like quiet strength. They remember times when they expected you to explain everything, yet now they wonder if you remained silent because you knew that defending yourself against half-truths would never change a heart that had already accepted another version of the story. This realization has become deeply emotional because it forces them to admit that they may have misunderstood not only the situation but also the person standing in front of them. The more they reflect, the more they notice things they completely overlooked before. They remember the hesitation in your voice, the sadness behind your smile, the moments when it seemed like you wanted to say something but chose not to. At the time, those moments seemed insignificant. Today, they feel impossible to ignore. They are beginning to understand that silence is not always the absence of truth. Sometimes silence is the burden carried by someone who knows that speaking without being believed only creates more pain. And listen closely, because this realization is changing the way they see everything. They are no longer asking who was right or who was wrong. Instead, they are asking a much more difficult question. What if the entire foundation of what they believed was built upon incomplete information? That question has become impossible to escape because every new memory seems to support it. Every forgotten detail now fits together in ways they never imagined. They see how easily assumptions replaced understanding, how quickly appearances became accepted as reality, and how one hidden truth quietly shaped the path both of you walked. And your heart needs this message because misunderstandings can separate two hearts, but the truth has a remarkable way of finding its voice when the time is finally right. Your soulmate feels that voice growing louder with every passing day, and as each missing piece falls into place, they realize that the story they have carried for so long was never the complete story at all. The confession has not only answered old questions, it has awakened one new realization that they can no longer ignore. Perhaps the person they needed to understand most was the one they understood the least. After hearing the truth, your soulmate tried to continue with life as though nothing had changed, but something inside them refused to return to the way it was before. The confession did not simply answer a few old questions. It reopened an entire chapter they believed had already ended. Suddenly, every memory they had carefully placed in the past began finding its way back into the present. Moments they hadn't thought about for months, perhaps even years, started appearing without warning. A familiar place, a quiet evening, an ordinary song, or even a passing thought would instantly carry them back to the connection they once believed they fully understood. But this time, everything felt different. They were no longer remembering those moments through the lens of assumption. They were remembering them through the light of truth, and that truth changed everything. And listen to this, because there are realizations that touch the mind, and then there are realizations that reach the soul. Your soulmate has experienced the second kind. It is the kind that cannot be ignored, because it quietly transforms every memory connected to it. Every conversation they once replayed now carries words they failed to hear. Every silence they once judged now carries emotions they never recognized. Every decision they once defended now feels heavier because they understand what was hidden behind it. The truth has not erased the past, but it has completely changed the way they see it. The tears they have been trying to hide are not only the result of sadness. They come from the painful understanding that two people can care deeply for one another while still becoming separated by things neither of them fully understood. Your soulmate has begun asking themselves how many opportunities disappeared simply because honesty arrived too late. They remember moments when they believed you were pulling away. Yet now, they wonder if you were quietly protecting your own heart after realizing your words were no longer being believed. They remember times when your silence felt confusing, but now they see that silence may have been carrying disappointment, exhaustion, and a hope that one day the truth would reveal itself without you needing to fight for it. That realization has broken something inside them because they finally understand that not every unanswered question was your choice. Not every distance was created by your heart. Sometimes people are separated not because love disappears, but because misunderstanding grows louder than truth. And your heart needs this right now, because when hidden truths finally come into the light, they do more than expose what happened. They reveal what was lost along the way. Your soulmate is mourning more than memories. They are mourning the version of your connection that might have existed if honesty had arrived sooner. And listen carefully, because another change has quietly begun inside them. For the first time in a very long time, they have stopped blaming the past and started listening to it. Instead of searching for reasons to protect their pride, they are searching for the lessons they overlooked. They replay the smallest details with remarkable clarity. They remember the look in your eyes when certain conversations ended too quickly. They remember the moments when it seemed like you wanted to explain something but chose to remain quiet instead. They even remember the emotions they ignored because they believed they already knew the whole story. Now they understand how dangerous certainty can become when it is built upon incomplete information. Every memory has become a teacher, revealing another truth they were never ready to see before. The more they reflect, the more impossible it becomes to believe that everything happened the way they once imagined. Because your heart needs this message. There comes a moment when tears stop being a sign of weakness and become evidence that the heart is finally accepting reality. Your soulmate is experiencing exactly that. These are not tears of hopelessness. They are tears born from clarity, humility, and the painful realization that someone they cared about carried burdens they never truly understood. They finally see that your patience was not indifference, your silence was not rejection, and your distance was not a lack of feeling. It was the quiet response of someone carrying a truth that no one was willing to hear. That understanding has left them overwhelmed because it forces them to admit that the person they thought they understood may have been the person they misunderstood the most. And as this emotional awakening continues, one final realization has begun taking shape within their heart. It's no longer enough to know the truth. They are beginning to feel that the truth is asking something of them in return, and they can no longer pretend they do not hear it. As the truth continued settling into your soulmate's heart, they realized something they had never allowed themselves to consider before. The story they had carried for so long was never complete because it had been built from assumptions instead of understanding. For the first time, they stopped looking at your connection through the eyes of old misunderstandings and started seeing it through the quiet honesty that only time can bring. The more they reflected, the more impossible it became to hold on to the image they once had of you. The person they thought they understood was slowly being replaced by someone far more remarkable. They began remembering not only your words, but your character. The patience you showed when you could have defended yourself. The calmness you carried when others expected anger. The dignity with which you accepted being misunderstood instead of creating more conflict. Those qualities seemed almost invisible at the time, yet now they stand out more clearly than anything else. And listen to this, because life has a way of revealing a person's true character long after the noise of misunderstanding has faded away. Your soulmate is finally seeing the parts of you that were always there, but were hidden beneath confusion, assumptions, and the opinions of others. They understand now that strength is not always loud. Sometimes, the strongest person is the one who walks away from endless explanations because they know the truth will eventually speak for itself. The more they revisit the past, the more they recognize the quiet sacrifices you made without asking for recognition. They remember moments when you could have blamed someone else, but chose peace instead. They remember opportunities where you could have exposed the whole truth just to protect your own reputation, yet you remained silent because you cared more about preserving dignity than winning an argument. At the time, your silence was misunderstood as weakness. Now they recognize it as courage. They finally understand that it takes incredible emotional strength to remain kind when misunderstood, to continue wishing someone well after being judged unfairly, and to trust that one day the truth will arrive without needing to be forced. That realization has left them deeply emotional because it challenges everything they once believed about your connection. And your heart needs this right now because genuine love often reveals itself not through dramatic gestures, but through quiet choices made when no one else is watching. The choices to remain patient. The choices to remain respectful. The choices to protect someone else's peace even when your own heart is carrying pain. Your soulmate now sees those choices with a clarity they never possessed before. And listen closely, because something else has begun changing inside them. They no longer remember you as the person they thought walked away. They remember you as the person who stayed true to your heart despite being misunderstood. That difference has completely transformed the way they think about everything that happened. They now realize that while they were searching for explanations outside of your connection, the answers had been quietly reflected in your actions all along. Every act of kindness, every moment of restraint, every decision you made with integrity now carries a meaning they completely overlooked. They are beginning to admire the very qualities they once failed to appreciate. They see that your loyalty was never weakness, your honesty was never manipulation, your silence was never indifference. It was the quiet expression of someone who refused to become someone they were not, even when circumstances gave every reason to do so. This realization has become impossible to ignore because it reveals a version of you they never truly knew. Because your heart needs this message, there comes a time when truth does more than correct old misunderstandings. It changes the way people see the ones they love. Your soulmate has reached that moment. They are no longer asking whether you deserve to be understood. In their heart, that question has already been answered. Instead, they are struggling with something far more personal. They wonder how they overlooked the depth of your character when it was quietly present from the very beginning. They wonder how many moments they misinterpreted simply because they accepted someone else's version instead of trusting what they felt deep inside. Those questions have humbled them in ways they never expected. Every answer leads them back to the same realization. You were never the person they believed you were. You were stronger, kinder, more genuine, and more selfless than they ever recognized. And now that the truth has removed the last remaining veil from their heart, they understand they can no longer remain where they are emotionally. The confession changed what they knew, but this realization has changed who they are. Standing at the edge of this new understanding, they feel that silence is no longer enough. Because some truths are not meant to remain locked inside the heart forever, especially when they have the power to heal what misunderstanding once tried to destroy. And listen to this, because after everything your soulmate has discovered, after every hidden truth that has finally come into the light, they have reached a place they never expected to stand. For so long, they believed the past was something that could never change, a chapter already written and permanently closed. They accepted that certain questions would remain unanswered, and certain feelings would simply fade with time. But now they understand something entirely different. While the past itself cannot be rewritten, the meaning of the past can change the moment truth finally arrives. When honest confession has transformed memories they carried for so long, replacing confusion with understanding and replacing assumptions with clarity. They no longer see your connection as something that slowly disappeared without reason. They now see how silence, misunderstanding, and hidden truths quietly stood between two hearts that never fully understood what was happening. That realization has brought tears to their eyes, because they finally recognize how much was lost to things that should never have remained hidden. And your heart needs this right now, because truth has a remarkable way of healing wounds that time alone could never touch. Time can soften pain, but only truth can explain it. Your soulmate is finally experiencing that healing. Even though it comes with emotions they never expected to feel, they have spent countless quiet moments asking themselves a question that grows heavier each passing day. What if the truth had been spoken sooner? They imagine conversations that might have ended differently. They imagine misunderstandings that could have been cleared away before they became walls between your hearts. They imagine opportunities that slipped away simply because neither of you had the complete picture. Those thoughts are deeply emotional because they know they cannot return to those moments and choose again. Yet instead of allowing those thoughts to trap them in regret, they have begun seeing them as lessons that cannot be ignored. They finally understand that assumptions are fragile foundations upon which to build decisions, while truth creates something much stronger. They realize now that judging a person's heart without knowing their full story can leave scars that last far longer than anyone intends. And listen closely, because this understanding has awakened a courage they did not possess before. For the first time, they are no longer afraid of the truth. They are only afraid of allowing another meaningful opportunity to disappear because of silence. That fear has become stronger than their pride, stronger than their hesitation, and stronger than every excuse they once used to avoid facing what they truly feel, because your heart needs this message. There comes a moment when people stop asking whether healing is possible and begin asking what healing requires. Your soulmate believes they finally know the answer. Healing begins with honesty. It begins with the willingness to acknowledge what was misunderstood, what was left unsaid, and what should have been recognized much sooner. They understand that pretending nothing has changed inside them would only create another chapter filled with the same unanswered questions. Instead, they feel an overwhelming desire to honor the truth that has finally reached their heart. They no longer want to define your connection by the confusion that surrounded it. They want to remember it through the sincerity that existed beneath every misunderstanding. Every reflection has led them toward the same conclusion. The person they once questioned is the very person whose heart they now respect more deeply than ever before. The tears they have shed are no longer only tears of regret. They have become tears of gratitude, because they finally know the truth before it became too late to understand it. And listen to this, because there is one final realization that has settled quietly into your soulmate's heart. They understand now that life rarely offers perfect timing, but it does offer moments of awakening. This is one of those moments. They are no longer searching for someone else to explain what happened. They are no longer depending on old stories or incomplete versions of the past. Instead, they are trusting what the truth has revealed to them personally. They know they cannot erase yesterday, but they can choose the spirit in which they walk into tomorrow. That choice has become clearer than ever before. They refuse to let fear speak louder than honesty again. They refuse to let assumptions replace understanding again. Most importantly, they refuse to ignore the value of someone whose heart remained genuine even when it was misunderstood. Your soulmate now realizes that some people enter our lives to teach us lessons, while others reveal who they truly are only after every illusion has fallen away. You have become that person in their heart. The confession they heard did more than expose hidden facts. It opened their eyes to the depth of your character, the sincerity of your intentions, and the quiet love that existed beneath every misunderstood moment. Now, standing at the edge of this new chapter, they know one thing with complete certainty. The truth they finally received has changed them forever, and the connection they once thought they understood will never again be seen through the eyes of misunderstanding. Because once the heart truly recognizes what is real, it can never honestly pretend it did not see it.